Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 40 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today we are joined by Mia O'Brien and Hacker to break down what we just saw, which honestly, guys, I thought we were going to come in here and be talking mostly about college football and Selection Sunday and all of that, but instead, Jaguars decided to go out and win in Tennessee at 10-6. Tank Bigsby scored a fourth quarter touchdown to make it a Jaguar to get the lead for the Jaguars, and then the Titans had two different drives to reclaim the lead and win, but the Jaguars had two different fourth down conversions, and so, I mean, wow, go Jaguars! They moved to their third win of the season. They're now 3-10 and tied with the Titans for last in the division. They're still mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but this seems like it was an important win for the players. And so, what was your guys' kind of immediate reactions to the win?
Yeah, I think that our good friend Mike Dempsey of Jaguars Today put it best that, look, yes, we're at a point where because the Jaguars are mathematically eliminated, you certainly could make the argument that a Jaguars loss is a win for the Jaguars at this juncture. I'm sure that there will be some comments on YouTube, X, and Facebook that will echo that here this afternoon. But ultimately, this is supposed to be your rival. You're supposed to take pride in this product, even if the Jacksonville Jaguars are to see a regime change and they are to have a different head coach and a different general manager next season. The reality is that a lot of these players will be back, and you wanted to see some semblance of life, of juice out there today. You did. I think getting a win gives those young players confidence. We'll obviously get into Brian Thomas Jr. with a high in targets today. Tank Bigsby returning to the form that we saw around the midseason. Jarian Jones was the MVP for me. So as much as, yes, I know the Tankathon crowd out there is a little bit sad on this fine Sunday in Duval County, I do think there are positives that you can look at in the long term and say, hey, this was a victory that was important to the trajectory of this franchise.
To me, the game was perfect other than the final score. I said all week long, Jarian Jones, Ventrell Miller, Tank Bigsby, Brian Thomas Jr., let the young guys have opportunities. Bigsby was obviously RB1 today. He had 18 carries. ETN had 4. See a lot of great things from the young guys, and at the end of the day, I hope they lost the game. And I said that all week on Hacker After Dark. They didn't. Mia, you make a good point. Mike made a good point. I guess it's always nice to beat Tennessee. Boy, they got problems. The Titans are awful, which I guess we'll get to in a moment. But they won the game. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's a win, but, you know, I would be lying to you if I said that I did not want them to lose at the end, because I do think losses now help you in April, obviously. Having said all that, I loved what I saw to Brian Thomas Jr. I loved what I saw to Jarian Jones. I loved what I saw. How about Cole Van Lannon coming in for Anton Harrison, who was ill, I guess, and played awesome at right tackle. So there were a lot of positive things from a lot of young guys on this Jaguar team today.
So our friend Dell puts it best, if you want to pull that comment back up, Gus. Both teams stink. That is certainly the reality of it. I promised both you, Hack, and Gus when we were getting ready for today's program that I would have a silver lining that our friend Hayes Carlion, who is boots on the ground for 1010XL right now up at Nissan Stadium in Nashville in the locker room as we speak. And so hopefully we'll get some more intel from Hayes as the program continues here. But what Hayes noted on the Terminex kickoff show this morning, yes, in the world of tanking, you want the Jaguars to lose, sure. But at the same time, long term, do you want the Tennessee Titans to realize that Will Levis is not the guy? With a weak quarterback class coming up in this year's NFL draft, the idea of Brian Callahan having to go out and find his own quarterback because he determines that Levis is not the guy. I don't think Will Levis played awful today. There certainly was a missed opportunity on fourth down in the red zone to Chigakonkwo that would have changed the trajectory of this game. Calvin Ridley with a couple of miscues. Sure, we'll get to that at some point. That's certainly something that Jaguar fans are familiar with. But ultimately, I think Hayes made a good point of, regardless of the Jaguar situation when it comes to the next 5 games, the Tennessee Titans finding out if Will Levis is the guy or not will dramatically impact the AFC South for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I feel like, to me, it's pretty clear that he's not the guy. But as you said, it's not like he really had a horrific game. Obviously, he missed that touchdown on the fourth down, but that was just him not seeing someone. Ideally, you'd like him to see that guy. But I don't know. It would be interesting to see how the Titans progress as they're continuing their kind of like mini rebuild post Michael Vrabel era, and especially what they do at the quarterback position. But I agree with both of you guys. We're just like I feel like the biggest just win from the day was not even the win that the Jags put together as a team, but just the win of a bunch of individual guys and especially rookies. Like even Mason Smith was getting involved. The Hacker said a bunch of names earlier, but particularly Brian Thomas Jr. and Jarian Jones felt like the players of the game on their respective sides of the ball. And so it was great to see them not only making plays, but making plays when it mattered and in the like clutch circumstances against a division rival. Even if they aren't going to be playing football in a month or two's time, then like it was still nice to see them continuing to develop and shine just today and right now. And so the other big kind of like takeaway that I had was just that Doug Peterson like won the coaching matchup for the first time in a long time. Like I can't believe how poorly Brian Callahan mismanaged this game between like all the fourth down decisions. It's like Dan Campbell can go for it on fourth down, like partially because he has such a great team around him and he has so much confidence in his guys. But he also go on for fourth down, like in his own territory or when everyone else thinks that they should kick. Because like in Thursday's circumstance, they were going against a great team in the Packers. And so he had some situational awareness and Callahan had no situational awareness, I feel like today, because they went for it on that fourth down where we talked about Levis missed a wide open touchdown. And so like hypothetically, yeah, it should have been a touchdown, but you also should have come away from that drive with at least 3 points. And the last two drives each could have just been 3-point drives. And so I feel like Peterson didn't win this game as much as Callahan lost it for the Titans, I think. But it was just interesting to see that Peterson did come out kind of on top in terms of the coaching battle, especially if you're assuming that Press Taylor is calling plays in the first half and he's calling plays in the second half.
Well, the crazy thing, real quick, about Brian Thomas, to me, that was the highlight. To not have any catches, right? 0 catches in the first half. And then for Brian Thomas to just completely and totally take over the game. I mean, you talk about winning the coaching battle. Well, they finally threw number 7 the ball. And I don't care if it's a 3-yard hitch or a 2-yard down and out. I mean, that's basically what they were doing until he broke a couple of them late. You got to get that guy the ball. We've been screaming it all year, and finally they hadn't had a target really in the first 2.5 quarters. And they just said, all right, well, we'll just throw him 3-yard down and outs and see what happens. And all of a sudden he has 8 catches for 86 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. is a freaking stud, man. No question about that.
And that's where I wonder, does someone get in the play caller's ear at halftime and say, hey, give him the ball, run the ball? We joked on the couch watching the game. Like, it feels like every single time that Doug Peterson goes into the halftime locker room, he says to the sideline reporter, we need to run the ball more. And then, quite frankly, they don't. They did today. They did against the New England Patriots in their second game in London. Again, those are 2 inferior opponents. And so that's, again, where I wonder exactly what the conversations are. I joked, but I'm joking here in jest, but like you could take it for what it's worth. Like, does Press Taylor look at his phone and search his name at halftime and see that like people are demanding the ball be given to Brian Thomas Jr. and that the ball be run in the second half? And now all of a sudden we see that. Look, that's said in jest, but it is fascinating, Hack, that we once again see a Jaguars offensive operation that sputters in the first half, refuses to give its best player the football, and then in the second half not only gives him the football, but also leans into the run game.
Yeah, look, I mean, that to me is the story. Bigsby getting 18 carries to Etienne's 4, I think, is a story. Clearly, Tank Bigsby was RB1 today, which is a story coming out of this. And I got to tell you, you can't really even celebrate this win because I brought up how it hurts you in April. Again, I love seeing what the young guys did, but the fact that they won the game is not good for the long term if you're thinking about the draft. I got 2 text messages, one from my mother and another from a buddy that's a season ticket holder, saying, oh no, if they string together a couple of wins here late, does that mean Peterson and Balky are coming back in 2025? I mean, so that's kind of where the Jaguar fan base is right now, right? I mean, you win the game, but immediately you go to the negative, like, all right, that hurts our draft stock, and does this mean Doug and Trent are coming back next year? That's kind of where we are, and it's a fair question to ask. The Jets are awful, right? I know they're playing well today against Miami, but the Jets are awful. The Raiders are awful. You play the Titans again. Good grief, man. What happens if you do win 2 of the next 3 or 3 of the next 4 and you end up finishing, 5-12 or 6-11? Is that enough for the regime to stay?
To that, I present 2 points, Hack. As we're recording and going live right now at 4:03 Eastern, The Miami Dolphins just came back and tied this game. It is now 23-all. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the Jets are playing well, at least in the fourth quarter. Perhaps they are not. Additionally, the Jaguars scored 10 points today against, yes, a defense that was second overall in yards per game allowed in the National Football League and the number one passing defense at bowling in yards per game allowed. But they also scored 10 points. The two, in my estimation, since the Ravens have not played / are on their bye this week, right? Yes, they are. The two leading candidates to potentially become head coach in this league just coach their team to a 28-point output down in Tampa Town and 34 points on Thursday night in Detroit. Do with that information what you will.
Yeah, I feel like the whole head coach and general manager talk is so tough, and I think that obviously we're not going to see a decision at this point until quote-unquote Black Monday at the earliest, so the Monday directly after Jacksonville's last game in Week 18. And so you kind of got to see not just see it to believe it, you got to wait around to see what happens, because I think anything is possible at this point. In terms of like, oh, no, the Jaguars won because it affects draft position. I don't think that's that big of a deal. Sauce commented on YouTube, we'll still have a top 5 pick in the draft. Don't care about first overall pick. Most first overall picks are a bust anyway. I don't know about the first overall picks are a bust anyway part of it, but I just think there's not a huge difference between having like the 3rd overall pick and the 5th overall pick in the draft, because we're all going to get caught up with all the names specifically. But since it is kind of a crapshoot event, I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. I think it's a bigger deal that the players were able to kind of continue to develop again and continue to play well in a clutch circumstance, even if it's not the playoffs and they're not going to make the playoffs. I think that's still really important.
The only reason I wanted the number 1 pick, and look, they're still alive for it. I mean, they could get it. The only reason I wanted it was twofold. Number 1, it makes the job more appealing, right? For Ben Johnson or whomever to say, well, I got the number 1 pick in the draft. And number 2, I hope that Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward or whomever goes absolutely flipping bonkers at the combine at their pro day, and then you hold that pick ransom. I didn't even want the Jaguars to use it. I just want them to have it for the appeal of the job. And number 2, to get, 3 or 4 additional picks from some team wanting to trade up a couple of spots to get into that number 1 spot. That was my only 2 takes on that.
That's really fair. That makes sense.
I have not dove into draft coverage nearly as much as we will in the coming months. I can just tell you this. Early returns, including the quarterbacks, if there is one generational, quote unquote, this would be the number 1 overall pick type player. We know who it is. He's probably going to be holding the Heisman Trophy by the end of this week. That is Travis Hunter. And I look at the teams that are ahead of the Jaguars or that will be in the race that are not in need of a quarterback, i.e. the New England Patriots and the Carolina Panthers. You'd be hard-pressed, I think, for either of those 2 teams to pass over on a talent like Travis Hunter. And so that's where, look, we are not in the business of tanking. I do agree. I know Joshua's getting some flack in the Facebook chat right now about being happy about a dub. I see a couple others who are excited for a victory Monday for the first time in a month and a half. Like, I get it, and I'm here for that. But ultimately, I do understand the other side of the coin, and those who are concerned. Now, what I will tell you is if you are not in the race for Travis Hunter, then there is certainly, again, early returns have not dove nearly as deep into the draft as we will on 1010XL. There's not as much of a difference between the next non-quarterback and where you might be picking at 8 or 9. It's very much a flavor. If you're looking interior defensive line, are you looking at corner? Are you looking at wide receiver? Which, hey, there's a little receiver by the name of McMillan out in Arizona that I think a lot of you should probably watch a time or 2 ahead of the draft and, ahead of, the next few weeks that remain in the Jaguars 2024 season. And so, look, that for me is ultimately what I come away from this on that side of this equation. If you want to talk about, oh, my goodness, we ruined our draft stock. If you're not getting Travis Hunter, fine, I understand that you're upset. But then you will have Mason Graham. You will have Will Johnson. You will have, I'm going to butcher his name until the cows come home, McMillan out at Arizona. Like, yes, that's the next group after that. I think those are still great football players that can be had. And you can get one of them if you are picking between 4 and 9.
Absolutely. To move it back towards just this specific game from today, totally agree with Hacker where I think a big storyline is Tank Bigsby taking over the job starting job from Travis Etienne. Travis did start today, and I feel like maybe might have out-touched Bigsby in the first half, but Bigsby definitely kind of ran away with the workload in the second half. And I've always been kind of, I guess, an Etienne apologist almost, but like I always thought that Etienne was firmly the starter. I believed Peterson when he stood up at pressers and said, no, like Tank's been great so far this season, especially earlier in the season, but Travis is still our guy. He's still our number one back. I believed that, and I believed what I saw with my eyes, which is that, like, yeah, Bigsby had a great start to the season, but I didn't think he was playing that much better than Etienne that the numbers might have indicated. But now at this point, like I agree with Hacker, and I think that the tide has officially turned, and Tank Bigsby is going to be the starting running back going forward, I would guess. But even if he's not officially the starter, it seems like he is going to receive the bulk of carries going forward. So that's definitely a huge thing to watch going forward.
I mean, David Montgomery, Jameer Gibbs, anybody? We've talked about that. Back to the Ben Johnson reference. I love ETN getting involved in the passing game. What do you have? 4 catches for 50 yards in the first half? I mean, that's great. It's not. This is not an anti-Travis Etienne sentiment. Look at the way they run the ball. Etienne would not have got a couple of those runs that Bigsby did. Etienne dances around and doesn't hit the hole necessarily, where Bigsby lowers the shoulder and goes. And Dave Campo has. We're doing the 5th quarter here in like an hour and a half, and I'll ask him again. He said it all year. Nothing against Travis. It's a 1-1A situation, but he thinks Etienne's got better eyesight he thinks Bigsby's got better eyesight when it comes to finding the hole, getting something out of nothing, not dancing around in the backfield. And you saw that today. And Bigsby wears on you and wears on you and wears on you, and then ultimately in the 4th quarter, bam, busts that one for a touchdown. So that was really, really good to see. And then I agree, the 2 guys on defense, Jarian Jones and Mason Smith. The Mason Smith thing is a puzzling one. That could probably be a reality series TV show for a few weeks. The rookie season of Jaguar defensive tackle Mason Smith, everything that transpired from inactive to just everything that's gone on. But he got substantial playing time today, and you noticed 94. You noticed him a lot today, disrupting things in the backfield, which was very, very nice to see.
Yeah. I think that there are certainly positives. Back to the running back situation, I have contended since the spring that while Travis Etienne may be one of the best football players, if not the best athlete on this roster, that was pre-Brian Thomas Jr. being drafted, that Tank Bigsby was the best running back, the best pure running back on this roster. I'm not trying to take a victory lap, but it is a reality that I'm so glad that so many of you in the comments, our 1010XL listeners, you guys have come and joined the coalition of it's okay to have 2 premier running backs, and one may serve you in one facet of the offense one week, the other might serve you as your lead tailback the next week. That is okay. And ultimately, I think that's a positive, and I believe that is yet another carrot to be dangled in front of a potential next head coach, general manager, if there is to be a regime change.
Totally. And Hacker mentioned Ben Johnson in Detroit using David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs, kind of a 2-headed backfield up there. It's the same thing down in Tampa Bay, where Liam Cohen is definitely a top head coach candidate, using Bucky Irving and Rashad White, who might not be nearly as household names as the 2 guys up in Detroit, but Cohen is also definitely doing great work with kind of 2 running back sets, like not just using 2 different running backs for their strengths, but also using 2 running backs on the field at the same time in what's called a pony personnel package. And so if either of those guys come to Jacksonville, it'll be really exciting to see what they're able to do with both Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, since they are both under contract, at least in 2025.
So just to be clear then, Gus, just to be clear, especially since we've got some new members of the chat joining us here on the Duval Rundown Instant Reaction Show, despite this 10-6 victory over the Tennessee Titans, you do still believe the Jaguars will make some sort of change at season's end?
Yeah, if I had to say, I feel like Doug is pretty clearly out, and like Balky is going to be like I was saying earlier, kind of I have to see it to believe it. But if I had to say, I would say he's probably going to be gone. But I don't know. I don't have any inside sources. It's just a gut feeling, and we'll see what happens in early January. But I wanted to ask you guys also about Andre Cisco, because he did not start the game. It seems like he was not in for the first 2 defensive drives for Jacksonville, assumingly because he was benched. But then he did come in starting in the 3rd drive and was kind of rotated in. and you had the big pass breakup that we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Will Levis's 4th down in the red zone where he missed a guy wide open. And so before we get to that, Hacker, I want you to tell people when the 5th quarter is and where it is, and more information about that, because we had someone asking on Facebook about that. But then I want your thoughts on if you were surprised that Cisco didn't start, and just if you think that makes sense going forward.
Yeah, no, I'll be taking off here momentarily. The 5th quarter tonight on 1010XL. We're in the studios tonight with the Pro Bowler Leon Searcy, the head coach Dave Campo, and myself. We should get underway no later than 6 o'clock, but the game ended pretty early, like 3:40, so we might get underway a tad before 6 o'clock, and we'll be taking calls for 2 hours, breaking down an emotional 10-6 victory for the Jaguars, the 3rd victory of the year. Very excited about that. But in all seriousness, it will be nice to talk about a win. We've gotten the hell beat out of us a lot of games this year, and our hearts ripped out on the 5th quarter, and you could sense that in the fans, so it'll be nice to hear that. As far as Andre Cisco goes, if you're looking for holiday gifts for the Jaguar fan in your life, I would not buy him a number 5 Jaguar jersey, because I think that thing's only going to have Cisco on the back of it for 4 more games. He's not going to be back here in 2025. I'd be stunned.
Yeah, I think it probably makes sense for like the majority of Jaguars impending free agents to not return. But what were your thoughts, Mia?
Yeah, I mean, same. I'm disappointed in the season for Andre Cisco that he's had so far, just because he was entering a contract year. Ultimately, Walker Little was in the same exact position as he was, and he worked his way. Whether you want to contend that he deserved the contract or not, he earned a contract extension, and Andre Cisco, with more playing time than Walker Little has had this year, has not. And so it's disappointing to say the least. I think, at least from the looks of it, I'm not in Nashville, as you guys can tell, so I don't have any intel from the sideline there, but from the looks of it, it certainly looks like he was benched those first 2 series in favor of Antonio Johnson, who quite frankly looked like he was benched a few weeks ago. And so the fact that they're still trying to figure out this rotation 13 weeks into the NFL season, Darnell Savage was signed to be the nickel corner here. The thought was Jardian Jones would compete on the outside, ultimately became their nickel corner. I believe he is the nickel corner for the next however many years. And now you also have Darnell Savage under contract. And so it's a mess in terms of, outside of Tyson Campbell and now Jardian Jones, where your pillars are for that secondary moving forward. But ultimately, that's where, again, to those of you who I see in the comments on X, Facebook, and YouTube who are panicking and thinking that this victory is going to buy Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke more time, there are still holes in this team that are glaring, that should not exist going into year 4 of this regime. And those glaring holes were still there today. The difference was that the Titans had more glaring holes and had more miscues and more questionable coaching decisions that led to the outcome of the result that you saw on the field today.
And real quick, and that's a good point. It's a win. It's a road win. It's a division win. You hate the Titans. I think the Jaguars are now ahead of the Titans, right? Because they have the head-to-head tiebreakers. So Jacksonville propels into 3rd in the AFC South at 3-10, with Tennessee now with the same record. I saw a really gross analogy on social media. I'm sure you saw it as well, from our guy Dilla, who said the Jaguars and the Titans are like a stomach ache. One is, I'm not going to be vulgar, but one comes out the front, the other comes out the other. That's kind of what it looked like out there. These were 2 bad teams. All right. These were 2 of the top 3 or 4 or 5 worst teams in football. So one bad team beat another bad team. But this will be the last thing I say before I take off. It is nice to know that our friends in Nashville, my guy Tyler Rowland, Locked On Titans, and the Two Tone Talk guys with Brad Steele and all the Titans podcast guys, they're friends of mine. I can just imagine their post-game shows right now. That team sucks. So we're not the only ones. We're in this with them, because Tennessee is awful. So at least they're suffering with us this year.
And by the way, we sat here this time last week and said, yeah, the Texans won a 3-score game, a 1-possession ball game, but it was ugly and they have holes. And I still contend, especially with the Texans' next 3 games coming off of their bye and knowing who the Colts have in their 4 remaining games coming off of their bye, that you could see for a 3rd straight year the division leader collapse in the AFC South and someone rise from the ashes. And that says about all you need to know, not just about the teams that were leading that potentially could falter and the two that we've seen falter, but also big picture, the division as a whole moving forward, which brings it full circle to the point we made earlier regarding Will Levis and if he is the guy long-term in Tennessee, because we're going to see if Anthony Richardson is the guy long-term in Indy. I think it goes without saying that CJ Stroud is the guy in Houston moving forward, at least at this juncture. I would like to think, contrary to some of the comments we're seeing, Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback in Jacksonville moving forward. Gus, I know you tweeted multiple times during the game that despite Mac Jones picking up his first victory as a starting quarterback for the Jaguars, you missed Trevor Lawrence. And what does that mean for the odds for the Jaguars to reemerge under a new regime or not as contenders in this division?
Yeah, a lot of big questions we can ask since, as we were saying, a bad team beat a bad team today with both of them out of the playoffs. It's kind of more about what does this mean going forward. But going forward, make sure to check out Hacker on the fifth quarter on 1010 XM or XL, pardon. So, Hacker, appreciate you joining. We'll see you next Sunday after the Jags host the Jets here at Everbank Stadium.
All right, guys, we'll talk to you on the fifth quarter in about 90 minutes.
All right, sounds good. I mean, I regret not getting to this before Hacker had to leave, but the only other specific question I had was just, what did you think of Calvin Ridley today?
Yeah, man, you got to text Hack. We got to get him back in here. You know he's got some things with Calvin Ridley that he wants to address. It was kismet.
We'll let him get to it in the fifth quarter.
It was kismet to see Calvin Ridley step out of bounds, 3 yards shy of the first down marker with seconds remaining in this ball game. There's no question about it. And it's vindication for those of us who knew from sources inside the building that the miscues that we saw from him last year were indeed miscues and missing checks and alerts at the line. And look, that's not to say that Calvin Ridley isn't a good player, because when he is operating at peak efficiency, he's an elite athletic specimen and talent. But yeah, I mean, again, I started off this podcast by saying it, and I will echo it once again. I understand for those of you who are in the tankathon business, this is a disappointment today. This is a division rival. It's a win. I also see plenty of you in the comments who are excited to celebrate a victory Monday. And when you can also celebrate the fact that you bet on yourselves by not going over the market for Calvin Ridley services and instead saying, hey, we'll draft his replacement, just like we did with Anton Harrison and Jawan Taylor a year ago, and bet on ourselves that we can find truly the player that best fits this scheme and Trevor Lawrence's skill set. And you did just that with Brian Thomas Jr., and he has a career day today. Yeah, it's sweet redemption, I think, for the Jaguars in more ways than one, especially because, Gus, the last time they were at Nissan Stadium, not that it hasn't always been a house of horrors. I was there, though, on that chilly January Sunday earlier this calendar year, and not good vibes the last time the Jaguars were up in Nashville.
Yeah, I feel a little bit for Ridley because, especially on that specific, I think it was a third down instead of the fourth down that the Titans did not get. He did run out of bounds and it seemed like he wasn't really aware of where he was, but Levis did also throw it pretty late. But also, like, there was a Tyson Campbell pass breakup, I think in the first quarter, but definitely in the first half, where Ridley ran basically a button hook or a curl and seemed like he just wasn't expecting the ball to come. And so Tyson was able to get the pass breakup very easily. And so, yeah, I'll still always stand by the fact that, like, Calvin Ridley is a good football player. That's what Ryan Nielsen was saying at his press conference on Thursday. But obviously, it was a massive, massive offseason win for the Jaguars to get just like almost twice as much value on just a quarter or a fraction of the cost in terms of letting Ridley walk and sign a huge contract in Tennessee and then getting Brian Thomas Jr. on a rookie scale contract. Yeah, huge win for Jacksonville. Definitely, they should feel pretty vindicated. Ridley was held out of the end zone. I think he went over his receptions prop, but did not go over his receiving yards prop, so it wasn't really that big of a successful revenge game for him. And so, yeah, Brian Thomas Jr. and was just kind of the story of the game if you had to put it on one player, I feel like.
Yeah, I would like to formally apologize for all of my friends who asked me if they should play Parker Washington in fantasy today. I would like to apologize for the 2 catches on 2 targets that Parker had. I think a lot of that was due to, again, Press Taylor being told he needed to get Brian Thomas Jr. more involved to get the offense running. And that's what they did in the second half, and it worked to great success. So yeah, I apologize to those friends. I would like to give some flowers and give some shout outs, Gus. I noted it off the top. I thought Jarian Jones on defense was the player of the game, and that's with all due respect to a couple other names I'm going to list off. He finished with 5 tackles, 1 sack, his first career NFL sack, a couple of pass breakups, just an absolute monster. And that, of course, comes on the heels of last week when he was ejected against the Houston Texans, but became, if he wasn't already a fan favorite, endeared to this fan base for his comments during the week regarding the fact that he said he would throw a punch again for any of the 70 some odd players that are affiliated with this roster during his time here. And so great to see Jarian step up to the plate. For me, he would be the defensive player of the game, although I'll leave that to Hacker and the boys to decide on the 5th quarter of who is our defensive player of the game. I would also like to give Josh Hines-Allen some credit. Look, would you have liked to have seen more from him and Trayvon Walker? Yes, but it's the same sad story we've been telling for 13 weeks now, which is if you're the Titans, yes, they have a futile offensive line, but ultimately because the Jaguars' interior of their defensive front has struggled to generate any sort of pass rush, you just double and triple team the 2 guys on the edge, and you're good to go. And that's where the development of Mason Smith is going to be so exciting and fascinating to see in the months and years to come, because if you can develop someone who, if only on paper, has the skill set of a Jeffrey Simmons or a Chris Jones, that would be a massive development, not just for his own progression, but for the opportunities that could lie ahead for 41 and 44. And so Josh Hines-Allen now is just 3.5 sacks away from the career sack record in Jaguars history, which is very, very exciting.
Yeah, I also wanted to shout out Trayvon because there was especially this one drive. I think it was the one where the Titans had the failed 4th down in the red zone earlier in the game. But there was 2 different plays in the red zone where Trayvon just did a great job containing the edge and making either a tackle for a loss or just kind of making a stop. And I feel like he was making similar stops on the edge throughout the whole game. I also feel like when the Titans were having success running the ball on their own, it was always just straight up the middle. And I just think that not just in this game, but the entire season, 41 and 44 have done a great job on the edges in both the run and the pass game. And so with all these names, Mia, my last question for you before we get out of here is just, if you had to pick one, who are you looking forward to watching most through the rest of the season? Is it seeing if Hines-Allen can get the record, or seeing a rookie like Thomas Jr. or Jarian Jones do better? Maybe Tank Bigsby now that he's kind of sort of gotten the starting job?
Yeah, I would think, obviously it's Hines-Allen in the record watch, that's for certain. I think even last year, mired in that 1-5 finish to the year. So many of us were paying attention to him closing in on the single season sack record in franchise history. And so as he goes for the career mark, yes, we'll be locked in on that. I do think that Brian Thomas Jr. approaching, if not already eclipsing many Jaguars rookie records, will also be something to monitor. But yeah, the development of Jarian Jones, I think, is going to be huge because, like I said, how does that impact where the development and the roster building goes from here? Because now you've paid Tyson Campbell. He is definitively one of your outside corners. You have Jarian Jones potentially definitively as your nickel corner for at least the next 3 seasons, if not more, which is a massive development to have those 2 pillars.
Yep.
Now, where do you go from there? And because you have freed up those 2 positions, you don't have to worry about them. Are you looking opposite Tyson Campbell? Are you looking at that safety position? Maybe not in round 1 or 2, but can you find someone that you can develop? Because look, Antonio Johnson's still a young player, but have you seen enough there? We already talked about Andre Sisco and the reality that he's probably going to be allowed to test the free agent waters this offseason with a new regime potentially. And so, look, that's where I'm excited in terms of a player that I'm going to be watching. It'll be Jarian, it'll be Mason Smith to see the strides they make, because I know we'll be locked in on the record watching. I do want to also note at more than one point during this game, Gus, it did appear, and I'll be curious to see the final snap count, that Monteric Brown was getting a ton more run opposite Tyson Campbell compared to Ronald Darby. I think that's also an indicator of where this team is headed.
Totally. I'm interested to see Darnell Savage, too. That's one more name I want to throw out there in the secondary. Came here to kind of fight Jarian Jones, I feel like, for the nickel role. And now, especially with Andre Sisco kind of having an underwhelming year, he's been playing a lot more safety. But similar to all the other 2024 free agent ads for Jacksonville, like Eric Armstead, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis, the list, even Devin Duvernay, a lot of these guys can't just be cut next offseason and you get rid of them. They're going to be in town for at least one more season, if not a couple. And so Darnell Savage is a guy that's kind of just an under the radar name that I'm interested to see if he can become a more consistent player over these last final games and maybe make a home for himself in Jacksonville over a longer period of time.
And for those of you in the comments that are chiming in about draft talk, we are slightly talking about draft. We're not really talking about draft, but we are. In case you missed it, make sure you listen to Duval Rundown's Instant Reaction Show from today on demand once it's posted. We did get into the idea of while losing today affects your position in jockeying for the Travis Hunter sweepstakes, could those remaining first-round picks, which I've now seen from a couple different camps and a couple different evaluators, Gus, that the expectation is that somewhere between 9 to a dozen players will actually have a first-round grade in this upcoming NFL draft, comparatively to normally they're somewhere between 15 to 20, how that could impact the Jaguars and the opportunity to bring in more talent, whether it's under this regime or a different regime in April. And yes, to our friend Reedy, I did get a new microphone for Christmas. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed the beautiful sound, because I'm also doing a women's basketball podcast these days, and we got some feedback on there that, microphone might be going a little bit, Mia. And so I said, hey, let's invest. So we appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully the audio is coming in crystal clear.
Yeah, I think the audio is fine. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to say now, who are the Jags picking in the first round in April? But we'll save that for another time. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the draft, including on this show, which will be next on Tuesday, also on Thursdays, as well as every Sunday after the Jaguars' final whistle. So thank you for everyone for tuning in. We will see you guys on Tuesday. Have a good one.